Thank you so much for being here, for your interest in the themes of the seminar. My name is Mónica Lourenço. I'm a researcher at the University of Aveiro in Portugal, and I'm also a teacher educator. I've been a member of Angel since 2019, and I was part of the Portuguese team that compiled the Global Education Digest, and I'm currently the co-convener of Angel's special interest group on teacher education. I'm not alone in this role, so joining me are Ben Mallon from Dublin City University, Ireland, and Qudsia Kalsoom from Beaconhouse National University, Pakistan. The special interest group was created in September last year, and so far we've had a very large membership of over 60 Angel members from over 20 countries who are working in the field of global education, global learning, global citizenship education, education for sustainable development, and across the teacher education continuum. So from pre-service, in-service teacher education, and also people working with teacher educators. So far we've had two meetings of the SIG. The first one took place in September, late September. It was sort of a meet and greet. We start getting to know each other. It's a very large group, and we also started to discuss what were our expectations for this group that it's starting. And then we brainstorm on the SIG's role, what activities we could be doing for the upcoming 3 years. Then in November, we had a second meeting. It was more of a promoting interaction between the members, sharing some knowledge, some insights, some ideas of what we could come up and what could build up the identity of the SIG. And we also set up some working groups. This is just an example of things that we did so far with the group. We started with a Padlet where we presented ourselves, where we discussed what our goals could be, research themes, our activities, the expected outcomes, and also how could we communicate between ourselves internally. Then we work on a document that is more specific about the goals, activities, and expected outcomes of the SIG. So for instance, you can see that as aims to pull together, discuss, communicate, establish an emerging research in global learning and teacher education, also to build the global network that promotes global education, global citizenship, and sustainable development education in a more equitable capacity, or to build capacity in the field of global education and global learning. We have also we're deciding of what we could do in terms of working in specific groups. And we came up with this arrangement of creating 4 working groups. The first one related with dissemination. So in terms of the events of publications that we could be doing in order to disseminate the work of the SIG members. Also in terms of research, supporting research collaboration, applying for funding. A group that came up from our last meeting was the one related with building capacity. So discussing possibilities to build teacher capacity and integrating global citizenship education and education for sustainable development into their practice. And also a group more connected with networking. So discussing possibilities to promote knowledge sharing and exchange between members in a more informal way. For example, roundtables, or having a place where we could just present the projects that we are doing so far. We have also created a Slack group so that we can communicate. We have 67 members so far that have enrolled in this group, where we can exchange some news, events, publications, projects, and we can comment and expose our reactions and set up some meetings, and also work in specific groups. What are we up to? So next we'll have the next SIG meeting will take place in March 2022, where we are going to define and discuss an action plan draft for each of these 4 working groups. And we have also thinking about participating in the upcoming Association of Teacher Education in Europe conference, which will take place from 20 to 22nd April in Sestri Levante in Italy. We have a call open to the SIG members where they can express their interest in the themes of the conference and say what they want to do. We were thinking about doing a panel to present at the SIG about some common research that we are doing as SIG members. So if you're not a member yet and want to become a member, that's a very easy thing to do. First of all, you have to be an Angel member. It's free. You can join for free. If you're an Angel member, you can join at any time. Just send an email and then you'll be added to the list. So I would just like to pass the mic over to SIG members and researchers Annette Scheunpflug, Susanne Timm, and Dorothea Taube from the University of Bamberg in Germany, which is an institution with a long history in research on teacher education and global learning, who will be presenting 2 empirical studies that have relevant implications for teacher education programs.
Thank you very much, Mónica. Thank you very much for your kind words, and thank you very much for giving us the floor. We're very honored and pleased to reflect and to discuss some parts of our research with you today. We are coming from the Chair of Foundations of Education at the University in Bamberg, which is a small university in Germany. So we are talking today about global learning and teacher education, and we will give you some empirical results of some of our studies. We will do it in the way how research is often presented, by first giving the relation between global learning and teacher education, then to explain very short our methods, then come to findings, and then to reflect the implications for teacher training and teacher training research. And then we are very happy to share with you some minutes of reflection and discussion. So if we look to teacher training and global education, then there is a growing awareness that teachers are important actors to prepare for climate change, to prepare for sustainability, and for global learning. So it is very obvious in the debate, and there's no discussion about that teachers are very important to make social change happen and to educate and to reflect on social change, and especially on this for globalization and climate. However, and that's the other side of this appreciation, global issues are perceived from the teacher side as difficult to teach. And we have a lot of research on that and a lot of knowledge on this. And of course, if something is perceived difficult to teach, it is very important to reflect how can this teaching be facilitated and what are the problems on teaching global issues and what is hindering the teachers to do it. And if we look in a broader way on teacher education research, we know from other studies in very different fields, from the subjects to educational issues, that professional beliefs are important predictors for the professional behavior of teachers. So what teachers believe, what perceptions and convictions they have in regard to the world, but as well in regard to didactics and their own teaching, is very important for what they are doing and how they are doing. And if we then know this, and we have the knowledge that global issues are difficult to teach, then professional beliefs might be one of the keys to come nearer for the question, what is this specific situation? What does it mean? And we see that there are very few empirical studies on professional beliefs of teachers in the field of global education, mainly focusing on very special grades, very special subjects, and very related to the professional understanding of the subject itself, but not on the teaching of global issues. So this was the starting point for the research we had been doing in the last years, by reflecting what are the perceptions, what are the general orientations of teachers towards teaching global issues. And in doing so, it is very important to see that these perceptions need a methodology to to be captured and to be reflected on. So we have been working on qualitative reconstructive paradigm, and we start with the assumption that there are two sorts of knowledge. So the knowledge, the professional beliefs we can explain. So if you are asked for an opinion, you can of course say your opinion, and you can very easily say that you are really in favor of group learning, you are really in favor of participation, you are really in favor of anti-racist education, and you're very related to sustainability. However, whether you really will show this in your behavior, and whether you really will act in an anti-racist way, if you really will act in a multicultural and cultural open way, this might be very different. And this is the theoretical knowledge. This is driven by the theoretical knowledge. And this differentiation between the two knowledges was done by Karl Mannheim, who died in 1947 in London, and was very strongly working about these two different kind of knowledge. And what we do is that with the method we are using, we try to reconstruct the theoretical knowledge, which is leading their professional beliefs and the professional behavior by the way how people are speaking about something, not what they are speaking, but how they do this. So our data are analyzed with a documentary method, and this is a comparative procedure within and across cases, and which leads to an abduction in the sense of a typology of ideal types of perceptions and understanding. And of course, all these interpretations are validated by different groups of researchers. So it's not one researcher alone is as an opinion, but it's having this data and this interpretation are having a very high level of validity by the way how it's done. We will talk about two studies. One study done by Susanne Timm about teacher students, 32 group discussions with more than 100 teachers, more than 120 teachers on beliefs dealing with different cultures and culturality, and a study of Dorothea Taube of experienced in-class teachers with 17 narrative interviews. And there we talk, the focus was on beliefs on dealing with global issues. The important aspect is that we have the range of our findings from pre-service and student teachers to teachers who see themselves as experts in global education. For this presentation, we are not just giving you the findings from the two studies. However, we had been generalizing the two studies to one, so that we can now give you one understanding of the two studies together. And we will present the main findings in typology, where our findings have been shown that all of the teachers are dealing with social complexity. So if you reflect, what is the importance, or what is the nutshell, or what makes the global learning difficult, it's dealing with social complexity. And our findings have been showing that the professional perceptions are reflecting 4 different aspects: the understanding of world and world society, the understanding of culture and their own culture, the understanding of social change, and the understanding of teaching and learning. And all these 4 things are interwoven. And of course, our separation is always now a reflective separation to understand better. And we can see that the way how these 4 aspects are interpreted are forming very different types. And in each type, world society, culture, change and teaching and learning have a very special profile. Dorothea.
Yes, thank you. I would like to give you a short overview of the 4 types. And as Annette Scheunpflug already said, this table reflects the study's findings, both studies' findings from a meta perspective. So we try to bring together the different results in these 4 types. The first type addresses social complexity through a certain and a clear perspective and by predetermined patterns. This becomes clear, for example, in the world, the teacher or the teacher-student's perception of the world society is making or is visible in the narrations and the descriptions. The world society becomes or is described and reduced to simple causes and effects and described as linear dependencies. Or this way of dealing with social complexity becomes visible in the way teaching and learning is understood. This type addresses social complexity through pre-selected and clear instructions that provide a frame to convey this clear perspective on global issues. Culture in this type is perceived as an essence and described as a definable unit. I would like to illustrate those characterizations of this first type by showing you quotations from interviews and group discussions we conducted. The first quotation illustrates the orientation towards a certain and clear perspective. I would propose that you just read the quotation and then I will give some further explanation. So we just take 2 minutes and you go through the quotation. The quotation is from a teacher who teaches geography as a subject. And in this quotation, the teacher speaks about speaks about change. The teacher, first of all, refers to an interview with the Minister of Economic Cooperation and Development that the students listened to. And through this interview, they got knowledge about global interdependencies. And afterwards, the teacher speaks about geography as a subject and her understanding of the subject. And she concludes that if you have the subject geography, you get knowledge about acting strategy. And this knowledge is knowledge that she describes as guiding knowledge. And through this guiding knowledge, the students get an idea on clear and quite defined ways of how they can act in the global world. And this way of presenting clear knowledge and acting strategies, that appears as a recurring pattern in the way teachers address change and global issues and its complexity in this type. My colleague Susanne will now present another quotation which shows the understanding of culture as an essence.
Yes, thank you very much. This second quote is taken off a group discussion among teacher students. And here we like to illustrate another time the type 1 now in regard to the conception of culture. These students are discussing how to bring up cultural aspects in their classes. Here we find the orientation toward essential and distinct culture, this or that culture. And while rejecting to include cultural issues explicitly, culture as a technique of distinction appears. Complexity is reduced by an essentializing concept of culture, and culture change is denied.
Thank you, Susanne. I will now go on and give you a description of the second type. The second type addresses social complexity of global issues through moral empathy. So similar to the first type, the world society and its interconnectedness is also reduced to simple causes and effects and described in linear dependency. So also in this type, a clear perspective on global issues is brought forward. Change in this type is associated with individual engagement and development and with an appeal to solidarity. On the didactical perspective, students are addressed especially on moral and on a moral and empathic level. And the understanding of culture especially stresses practices of routines like, for example, donations. I see that the time is running, so maybe we skip this this quotation and go forward to the third type. Type 3 is characterized by a focus on the cognitive level and on the cognitive interest dealing with the social complexity. Here, the world society and its interconnectedness is understood and described from multiple perspectives, so in contrast to type 1 and type 2. And what is characteristic for this type is that in this type, dealing with social complexity means gaining a broad understanding of global problems, but without going deeper into change. And in many aspects, change, or with regard to many topics, change is excluded from the discussion. Type 4 represents and approaches social complexity by self-reflection and learning. The world society is also understood and described from multiple perspectives as type 3, but in addition to that, with a reflexive and an open approach to change. For example, by the discussion of means of participation for the everyday life of the students, but also with regard to change on a systematic level, so with regard to society or school. And on a didactical perspective, teachers create a learning environment that stimulates self-reflexivity and the ability to discuss and to start a dialogue about global issues. And I have another quotation which shows the contrast between type 1 and 2 and type 4 in a very visible way. So in this quotation, the orientation towards this reflexive multi-perspectivity is obvious, or can be seen in this quotation. So what you can see in this quotation is that the teacher speaks about a lesson about where they discussed the three gorges dam. It's also in geography. And in contrast to type 1, it gets visible that the teacher addresses this topic by multiple perspectives. The description shows also a reflexive approach that characterizes the understanding of a global issue, this three gorges dam. And there is a learning environment where the students are encouraged to discuss and to set their own prioritizations when thinking and also assessing a global problem. So this fourth type is the type that, from a scientific perspective and also with regard to expectations brought forward in educational policy, represents the ideal that can be said it leads to a professional understanding of global learning. And I just want to repeat that these types, as we came up with these types, these types do not fit descriptions for individual teachers, but they accentuate certain characteristics in an idealized way. And I hand over to Susanne, who will give some findings, some concluding findings.
Yes, thank you very much, Dorothea. And even if these are idle types, we will summarize with some noticeable points across all of them. First of all, among the four types, only one type is leading to a professional understanding of global learning. The other types have no or weak links to the complexity of the world society or to social justice and change in abstract context. Another issue is that we found that beliefs of world society, of culture, and of didactics are linked to each other. It isn't as far away from the modus of world understanding to one's own didactic theory. For various contexts and topics, we have found that dealing with complexity is encountered by referring to one's own horizon of experience, the own experience in one NGO, the own experience with one music genre. Conversely, topics beyond one's own sphere have little relevance. This minimizes access to complexity, is even more seen in regard to abstract sociality as central aspect of global learning. Finding an approach to this societal dimension of world society is a great challenge. And our methodological approach has made it possible to identify the fundamental gap between sayings and doings. Even though students or teacher might be close to topics of global learning in their sayings, their practice principles show a different way of doing. For example, unidimensional knowledge instruction without participation for learners. With these findings in the background, we finally want to give an outlook on implications for two fields. First, what does this mean for teacher education? More emphasis should be put on the link between content and didactics, the what and the reflected how. The theoretical knowledge should be brought closer to persons and their experience. Teachers are needed who learn to reflect on their biographical background and on implicit knowledge about the world. Experiences of diversity and participation in different dimensions and intensity is needed. We need to provide a look at inner differences within a group of apparently equal and at the same time for togetherness across distances. Professionalism in global learning can benefit from more experiential knowledge of diversity that is also linked to the ability to act. Our last section refers to research. What is needed to be done to improve teacher education toward professionalism in global learning? First, we need to know more about the origin of this implicit knowledge and influencing experiences. Where and when do these patterns of beliefs relevant for global education emerge? This results in the next area of needs for research. We should know more about effective interventions within teaching, curriculum, and higher education development. How can we tackle the problems identified in teacher education particularly well? Thank you very much for your attention, and now we are really interested in the discussion with you.
Thank you, Annette, Dorothea, and Susanne. Some very interesting observations, and I think a very important piece of research there that I think has some very important implications for teacher education. And I'd like to pass back to Mónica.
Thank you so much, Doug. So Qudsia, Ben, and myself will showcase trends in research and practice that are related to teacher education for global citizenship and for sustainable development in Ireland, in Portugal, and in Pakistan, so in our own contexts. So the presentation focuses on research that has already been completed, research that is underway, or just starting. So from my perspective, it actually glances over the past, present, and future of research on global citizenship education and education for sustainable development, which has been growing exponentially in the past decades. I feel that despite being grounded on separate policy and research programs, global citizenship education and education for sustainable development are quite interrelated and have emerged recently as these educational possibilities to help individuals understand and reflect upon the world, as well as respond to its challenges, its tensions, and paradoxes. The two have gained relevance in international discourse in the past decades, as expressed in SDGs SDG target 4.7, and have come to the fore as global priorities for governments around the world. Some countries have introduced ESD and GCE, so Global Citizenship Education, Education for Sustainable Development, as separate disciplines or as new goals in their study programs and curricula, while others were actually looking at what they were already doing and making changes. The mere presence of global citizenship education and education for sustainable development in political documents and discourses has not been sufficient to ensure successful and sustainable implementation. So there is still a gap between theory and practice. If we take a look at UNESCO's 2020 Global Education Monitoring Report, we can see that only 12% of countries report including GCE-ESD principles in national policy documents and curricula. They report revising textbooks, although changes are always constrained by the slow progress of curricular reform and textbook development. And most striking is the fact that in most countries, pre-service and in-service teacher programs include limited or actually no core knowledge in this field. So this means that global citizenship education, education for sustainable development, and global learning are still absent from many classrooms worldwide, or sometimes dealt in softer terms, to use Andreotti's terminology. And what does research tell us about this? Well, according to research, this is actually due to the perceived conceptual vagueness and complexity of GCE and ESD, criticism to GCE, ESD, propensity to teach national or regional themes, curricular insecurity, what and how to teach, lack of administrative or curricular support. So I feel that it seems fundamental to understand how GCE and ESD can be best incorporated into teacher preparation so that teachers and also teacher educators who are sometimes forgotten in educational research can develop the confidence, the knowledge, and the skills that are necessary to introduce students to global citizenship education, global learning, and to all of these topics effectively. So the study that I would like to share with you is framed in this context and is focused on a case study that I conducted with a group of pre-service teachers in a Portuguese higher education institution who developed a global citizenship education project in non-formal education settings. So the study aimed to understand whether how and to what extent these pre-service teachers reconstructed their becoming, it's not that, but they're becoming teacher identities while developing this project. Or in other words, how did this experience with global citizenship education change the way these pre-service teachers see and understand their role and their place in a globalized world? So the study was developed in Portugal, which is a country where GCE has gained momentum in the past 5 years or in the past 10 years. So the first time we see the term global citizenship used was in 2010 within the National Strategy for Development Education. So there is a close link between development education and then moving forward to global citizenship education, although the two concepts are still regarded as synonyms in the Portuguese context. In this document, we can see that the main goal is to promote global citizenship by raising awareness of the Portuguese society to development issues in the context of growing interdependence and acting towards social transformation. Then in 2017, after curriculum reform and aligned with the definition of a student's profile at the end of compulsory schooling, I think that is something that also took place in most of European countries where there is a definition of the competences that students should possess by the time they finish compulsory schooling. The Portuguese government approved a national strategy for citizenship education, which aims to develop competences for a culture of democracy with an impact on individual civic attitudes, interpersonal interactions, and social and intercultural relationships. So this document instituted the curricular component of citizenship and development, which is a cross-curricular, understood as a cross-curricular, but also as a standalone subject at all levels of compulsory education, thus opening the door for the integration of GCE into curriculum. So the document also stresses the need to invest in pre-service and also in service teacher education, which is a goal that is also set as the first goal in the National Strategy for Development Education from 2018-2022. However, we can say that teacher education for global citizenship in Portugal is still dependent on individual teacher educators' commitment. So the context of this study was a Portuguese higher education institution. So the study took place during academic year 2019-2020, so exactly at the pandemic, so at this moment, in a course that was titled Educational Intervention Project, which is a part of the final year of an undergraduate study program in elementary education. So in this course, students are organized in small working groups. They must choose a preferential theme or area where they're developed their intervention project. And then each group is assigned a mentor, a teacher educator, and a formal or non-formal education contest where they are to develop their project. So the participants in this study were four pre-service teachers who chose global citizenship education as a preferential theme to develop their projects. Other groups chose outdoor learning, for instance, or physics education. So the participants were representative of today's typical beginning elementary teachers, at least in Europe, in that they were female, white, and mainly in their early 20s. So, however, they were diverse in both their education and experience. And prior to taking the course, none of the pre-service teachers had ever heard about global citizenship education. So these are some of the activities that these pre-service teachers carried out, so visiting and observing educational settings, attending lectures, reading, and discussing, which I think is very relevant, and also then designing global citizenship education activities that they did for 8 non-formal education settings, which were part of a nearby municipality. They also participated into our weekly discussion with their mentor and then wrote individual reflections and group reports. So in terms of the methodology used, this is a qualitative case study focused on this group of teachers and aimed at understanding the effects of a teacher education program in the reconstruction of pre-service teachers' teaching identity as global citizenship educators. For that matter, I collected the individual reflections they wrote throughout the academic year, so from October 2019 to June 2020, which I then analyzed thematically. So in terms of the results, by reading their reflection, there were 3 themes that were apparent. So pre-service teachers' perceptions and experiences of global citizenship education, then the demands of teaching in a globalized and uncertain world, and then their role or identity as citizenship education. So in what concerns the first theme, and given that these teachers had no prior knowledge on global citizenship education, it was not surprising to see that earlier in the course, their conceptualizations were more simple and narrow, so they were related with civility, values, respect for diversity. For instance, Martha says, GC implies promoting respect, solidarity, and politeness by teaching children simple gestures such as helping elderly people cross the street, smiling at the supermarket cashier, or saying please and thank you. So this is how they saw global citizenship education in a very simple and narrow way. Then as the year progressed, and they engaged in the course activities, their conceptualizations became clearer and more reflective. I don't know if they are more connected to what they were reading, perhaps, but I can see from Chloe's statement that she sees global citizenship education as a new educational paradigm and a path. And I find interesting that she uses the word path that should be taken in formal and non-formal context by saying that it's something that is not finished once you teach those students, but continues throughout their own life, to prepare children and teenagers for future international cooperation and also for intercultural understanding. Also, according to their reflections, the teacher education program helped them understand the major purposes of education. So what is education really for? And to reconsider the demands of the teaching activity in a globalized world. So as Irina states, in her 4th reflection, the role of education in a globalized world is to prepare citizens that are aware of the world around them, that understand how the world works and that respect and value diversity. We as future teachers have the responsibility to promote global citizenship education. Then pre-service teachers also realized that there is no other way than to adopt transformative forms of education to help students navigate the uncertainties of an unpredictable world marked by constant major challenges such as the pandemic. And in her reflection, Chloe addresses this situation of instability that was brought by the pandemic and how it made her wonder that it is urgent to bring global citizenship education to everyone. It is crucial that we try to be more aware of what is happening around us, assuming an ethically responsive behavior, collaborating, being tolerant, just, peaceful, and promoting social transformation wherever we are. Finally, the course also allowed pre-service teachers to reconsider the type of teacher they want to become and to commit to global citizenship education. As Chloe writes, I've developed a personal interest in global citizenship education, which has been increasing as I become more aware of its principles. And I feel that it's mandatory to adopt teaching strategies that cater for the inclusion of all students, for equal opportunities, promote an awareness that we need to think and act locally to make a difference at a global scale. And she says that it is along these lines that I want to act as a future teacher. They also mentioned that they feel motivated and willing to teach for global citizenship as a future, and they feel that this is an educational perspective that is aligned with their own values and beliefs. So they find that it's connected to what they think that should be doing. So as Laura says, my duty as a future teacher is to commit to global citizenship education in the classroom, to inspire other teachers to do so, and to contribute to the education of global citizens. And then she says that she needs to align this personal and professional self a little bit more by saying that it is also my duty as a citizen to put into practice what I've learned, to become a global citizen and also to lead by example. So very, very quickly, in short, what I see from these reflections is that the experience with global citizenship education was positive in helping pre-service teachers grow as global citizenship educators. Actually, the impact of the pandemic, it helped them realize the relevance of GCE pedagogies and of teachers' increased responsibility to commit to transformative forms of education, to teach people to collaborate, to come up with a solution to the pandemic, to avoid inequalities and to how to overcome this type of inequalities that became a little bit stronger and more present due to the pandemic. And it's actually interesting to see, I was noticing that Annette referred that the online situation was critical for them to develop more reflective understanding of these pedagogies. And actually what happened with these teachers that they created a WhatsApp group. And this helped them to continue reflect about those things. And me being there for 2 hours with them weekly also helped me to lead reflection about those topics. Yet they still feel unsure about its integration in the curriculum. And it's also something that came out of their reflections, which they relate to the complexity of the concept. So they still feel that this is very difficult to teach, it's very complicated. There are many interpretations of this theme, and also the lack of time to read more about global citizenship education. So these findings, what they suggest is that a year-long single course is actually not enough to prepare confident global citizenship educators. I feel that efforts should be a coordinated approach that is integrated across disciplines and throughout teacher preparation. So instead of adding 1 or 2 courses addressing global citizenship, making global citizenship education a program-wide mission and integrating it into every component of the program, from curriculum, pedagogy, field placement, teacher educators, professional development, may actually better prepare candidates with the knowledge, skills, and commitment and confidence to teach from a global citizenship perspective. So this is what I wanted to share with you. And now I'd like to pass the word to Ben.
This brief presentation is focused on in-service teacher education for global citizenship in the Irish context. I'll talk about sort of 2 important developments in relation to Irish educational policy and global citizenship. I'll look at some of the most recent research in relation to global citizenship education in the Irish context, and then talk very briefly about how this research has been used to develop a recently funded in-service teacher education programme Thanks, Mónica. So one of the key developments in the last year or so has actually happened in initial teacher education, and the Teaching Council released their standards for initial teacher education, CAME, and within that standards document, the Teaching Council have set forth that all initial teacher education programs shall include global citizenship education within their programs, and as you can see from the definition there, it's quite a broad and slightly different framing of global citizenship education to what's been seen before, including education for sustainable development, which we will have seen, but also well-being, personal and community well-being, social justice, interculturalism. And they also recognise this potential integration between inclusive education and global citizenship education. And this is particularly important in the context of in-service teacher education, as the Teaching Council identified, this CAME document is seen as the keystone for professional learning. So this will shape what professional learning that teachers will undertake throughout their careers. Thanks, Mónica. Another really important issue at the moment is the redrafting of the Irish primary curriculum. So the previous curriculum in 1999 was contextualised within sort of the post-conflict issues on the island of Ireland, but also significant global issues, migration and xenophobia are mentioned in the white paper, which came out in 1995 and shaped that 1999 curriculum. So the draft primary curriculum framework is currently under consultation, and the consultation is due to finish in 2022. Within the draft primary framework, they recognise the context that we're living in at the moment, challenges of climate change, sustainability, migration once again, and geopolitical shifts, and recognising some of what they describe as dispositions and skills that are important in terms of resilience, creativity, innovation, and critical thinking. One significant difference within the new draft primary curriculum framework is a focus on key competencies, which include two that I'll talk about now, being a digital learner and being an active citizen. Thanks, Mónica. So one of the key competencies being an active citizen of importance to those of us working in the area of global citizenship education. We can see in the left-hand table some of the attributes that define that competence. Rights and responsibilities mentioned there, and both developing an understanding and acting upon. Democratic practices, the recognition of injustice and inequality, and again, that action component, and the developing capacity to make choices in favour of a sustainable future. Some of the implications for in-service teacher education at this time with this changing framework are for those of us working in in-service teacher education, how we might need to respond to a change or a different primary curriculum. And some of these challenges might be around the different interpretations of competency-based frameworks, so research which identifies that they can be viewed in lots of different ways. There's also research within the Irish context that highlights how innovative and sustained models of professional development can support professional learning of teachers around competency-based frameworks, and how these models of CPD can also be used to support children's learning in relation to these competency-based frameworks. There are also big questions about integration and how will these competencies and this active citizenship competency be integrated across the Irish primary curriculum. Thanks, Mónica. Another competency that's particularly important to consider is this of being a digital learner. So we can see from the new primary curriculum the idea that children will be empowered to be active digital citizens, and this idea about developing a responsible, safe and ethical use of technology. And it makes reference to a digitally connected and interdependent world. So significant overlaps between lots of the work done in global citizenship education. Research from my colleagues Gabby Martinez Science and Maria Barry have identified some of the challenges of digital global citizenship education, both in relation to sort of knowledge base and the need for critical education, critical engagement, and the importance of ensuring access. There are opportunities in terms of the experiences and participatory opportunities and the avenues for professional learning, but also significant risks in terms of ethics, the safety, and potential reproduction of inequality. In terms of current research in the Irish context, I was just going to talk through some of the key research which has informed a recently funded teacher education programme that myself, my colleague Maria Barry and other colleagues have been working on. So in terms of the status of global citizenship education in the Irish context, there is increasing visibility recognised, and the current curriculum from 1999 is recognised as an important site for global citizenship education. Comparative research has demonstrated the relative strengths of primary level global citizenship in service teacher education in the Irish context. And potential directions, well, firstly, it's important to recognise the importance of in-service teacher education in this area is recognised. And there's also a recognition of significant opportunities for developing a focus on early childhood education and whole school approaches. Research from the Global Schools Project has highlighted the potential strength of collaboration between different partners in the development of high quality in-service teacher education. And that research also showed that the potential of collaborations between higher education institutions, NGOs, and teachers to foster transformative values-based teacher education. In 2020, Irish Aid put out a call for proposals to develop a strategic partnership for the delivery of global citizenship education in primary schools, a programme of in-service teacher education. And I'll talk very quickly about the funding we received in relation to that project. If you could flick on that slide for me, Mónica, thanks. So the Global Citizenship Primary Strategic Partnership involved myself and Maria within Dublin City University in partnership with the Irish National Teachers Organisation, a teacher union of 43,000 primary teacher members, the Irish Primary Principals Network, an organisation of representing 6,400 primary principals and deputy principals, and TROCRA, an NGO with over 40 years experience in terms of development education. And the project is based on a research-informed approach, building on collaborations and partnerships between those four organisations, and focused on the inclusion of partners across the development education sector, but also across the primary schools across the island, a focus on digital engagement and whole school approaches. I don't have time to go into the other details of it, but just to recognise that within the programme, there's a significant opportunity for global citizenship education research. Firstly, a national survey of Irish primary teachers and school leaders, and a second strand focused on a scoping study on early childhood education. Just on the final slide, Mónica, it was just to, I suppose, highlight that there is increasing global citizenship integration into Irish policy, but questions remain about the integration of global citizenship education into practice, opportunities for research-informed teacher education, and also opportunities for a deeper and wider exploration of GCE practice. So I'll hand over to Qudsia. Thanks.
So I'm going to talk about a research which is still going on, and the research is about teacher educators and the implementation of teacher education for sustainable development in Pakistan. So in this research, I and my colleagues are trying to answer two research questions. Number one is, how do teacher educators in Pakistan integrate ESD in their teaching? And the second question is, what challenges do teacher educators face regarding the implementation of education for sustainable development? So first, I would like to mention the study context, that why did we design this research? In fact, in Pakistan, teacher education was completely restructured from 2006 to 2016. So this is the time when the whole world was experiencing decade for education for sustainable development. So it was from 2005 until 2014. So teacher education was restructured in Pakistan almost at that time. So as a part of the restructuring, the following key documents were also developed. Number one, National Professional Standards for Teachers. They were developed in 2009. And then Standards for Accreditation of Teacher Education programs were also developed in 2009. Another thing that happened, that was standardized curriculum for pre-service teacher education. 2 standardized curricula were developed, one for elementary teacher education and the second one was for secondary education. So these, as a part of restructuring, these key documents were developed and they are still being referred across the country. So in a study which I and my colleagues did in 2019, we found we actually analyzed 3 of the documents: National Professional Standards for Teachers, Standards for Accreditation for Teacher Education Programs, and the B.Ed Elementary Curriculum. So we analyzed these 3 documents and we found that out of 10 national professional standards for teachers, there was no separate standard for teachers to demonstrate knowledge and understanding of sustainability issues, concern for sustainability, and pro-sustainability behaviors. However, knowledge of peace, equality, justice, brotherhood, and tolerance have been included in standard 3. Another thing which we found was that ESD processes like collaboration, dialogue, and active and participatory learning have also been mentioned under various standards. Moreover, the use of ICTs, that is standard 7 in National Professional Standards, and collaboration have also been included in pre-service teacher, have also been included. So although there is no dedicated standard, National Professional Standard for teachers that is related to education for sustainable development, but we can see that there is some presence of different aspects of education for sustainable development in the National Professional Standards. Mónica, please, next slide. There are 7 accreditation standards for teacher education programs in Pakistan. These standards are further divided into 154 indicators, and our analysis showed that overall only 9 out of 154 indicators are related to education for sustainable development. So although some aspects of education for sustainable development have been addressed in the National Professional Standards for Teachers, but in teacher education programs, there is much less presence of education for sustainable development. Next, please. There are, and when we analyzed B.Ed Honors Elementary Program, we found that there are 45 courses. However, there is no standalone compulsory course on education for sustainable development. And content related to sustainability issues has been included in 3 of the courses. ESD processes like collaboration, collaborative learning, active learning, and participatory learning have also been mentioned in different courses. However, none of the courses mention ESD learning, although processes have been mentioned, but and some content has also been mentioned. But if we use the framework of very much cited framework of Tilbury, according to that framework, if we like when we analyzed them with reference to ESD learning, that includes asking critical questions, envisioning more positive and sustainable futures, clarifying own values, and thinking systematically, and systems thinking, and exploring dialectic between tradition and innovation and lifelong learning. We couldn't find these outcomes in any of the courses. Next, please. So in the light of this context, where we found that teacher education programs have not really focused on education for sustainable development. So we thought that we should be investigating teacher educators challenges which they are facing, and the most important thing, that then how are they integrating education for sustainable development, or how they are implementing this in their teaching. So for this purpose, we designed this study, because we know that teacher educators in Pakistan are integrating ESD. So in this qualitative descriptive research, we intend to include minimum 20 teacher educators, and until now we have been able to interview 14 teacher educators, and we have interviewed them through by using some semi-structured interview protocol, and we are still collecting the data, so data collection is still going on. Data collection and data analysis are being done simultaneously through constant comparative design. Mónica, please, next. So the initial interview questions which we included, they were, how do you integrate ESD content and or ESD processes in your teaching? Please provide some examples. The second question was, what challenges do you face regarding the implementation of ESD? And the third, how do you address those challenges? Next, please. So data have been collected from through semi-structured interviews of 14 teacher educators. In the study, data is being collected through constant comparative method, that is simultaneous data collection and iterative processes of data analysis to generate codes. Next, please, Mónica. So the data which we have gathered until now has shown us that teacher educators are integrating sustainability themes in different courses. They are engaging pre-service teachers in collaborative and reflective tasks. So it shows that they are integrating ESD processes in their teaching. Some of the teacher educators are raising awareness by organizing seminars on education for sustainable development. Some teacher educators are engaging students by engaging their pre-service teachers in education for sustainable development by engaging them in ESD related research topics. And the challenges which have been highlighted by teacher educators are institutional culture that is not supportive for ESD. And the second one is lack of focus on ESD in teacher education, in teacher education policies. So these are the things which have emerged. So I'm just going briefly going to mention the results, though I have already mentioned the themes, but some more detail is here. Some teacher educators mentioned that they integrate themes of human rights, social justice, climate change, resource depletion, economic disparities, poverty, and overpopulation in their course. There is a course in B.Ed honor programs. The course is entitled as School, Community, and Teacher. And some teacher educators, they mention that they get an opportunity to integrate these themes when they are teaching that particular course. However, it is interesting to note that nearly all the teacher educators mention that collaborative work and reflection on social issues is a key component of their teaching across all the courses. Whatever the course they are teaching, they actually engage their students in collaborative work and reflection on social issues. So we can say that these processes are being integrated by teacher educators in Pakistan. Next, please. One teacher educator mentioned that she arranges seminars or talks on sustainability issues to raise student teachers' awareness. 4 teacher educators mentioned that they encourage pre-service teachers to investigate ESD-related issues in their final research project. So there is only one teacher educator who mentioned that she is arranging seminars. Most of the teacher educators are actually integrating ESD processes. Some are engaging in engaged in ESD research. Next, please. So here are the challenges. All the teacher educators insisted, in fact, that ESD cannot be fully implemented with fragmented efforts of individual teacher educators. There is a need of pro-sustainability culture in universities. I've just included one small quote of the respondent. She said that I ask my students to submit their research drafts electronically, but most of the other professors ask for submitting paper copies of the draft work. Such kind of contradictory practices do not promote the pro-sustainability behaviors. In fact, this kind of issue emerged almost in every single interview where the respondents, they said that they do not get supportive culture. And there is another thing which I would like to mention, that some of the teacher educators said that they were not aware of the concept of education for sustainable development 3-4 years ago. They have come to know about this thing just in the past few years, because overall there is a lack of awareness, whether the awareness is with the teacher educators or with the pre-service teachers or in-service teachers. So there is a lack of awareness. So they are learning, they have come to know about these things, but it doesn't mean that all other colleagues have also learned about education for sustainable development. So this is the biggest challenge, which they have said that they want to implement ESD through their behaviors as well, but they do not get that support at the institutional level. Next, please, Mónica. The other challenge which was highlighted by many teacher educators, actually 11 teacher educators highlighted that ESD is neither a focus of teacher education policy or standard of accreditation of teacher education programs in Pakistan. As a result, the majority of teacher educators are not aware of the elements of ESD, and their own teaching practices are not ESD based. They do not appreciate any pro-sustainability practices. So that is again a challenge. Next, please. So I'm going to mention some conclusions which we have drawn until now on the basis of the data which we have gathered. The study findings indicate a need for mainstreaming ESD in teacher education curriculum, accreditation standards, and teacher education policy. Accreditation standards were developed in 2009. And similarly, the program was developed in 2000, the curriculum was developed in 2012. These documents need to be revised. It has been a decade that these documents were developed. They need to be revised, and ESD should be made a mainstreaming theme in these documents. The findings also indicate that although ESD can be integrated in the existing teacher education courses, it depends on the agency of individual teacher educators. Earlier researches have also shown that these things can be integrated, but they largely depend on teacher educators' agency. The study further indicates a need of promoting institution-wide culture to promote sustainability. Thank you very much.
Just to say before I pass on to Massimiliano to say a few words of thanks, just to say some perspectives on all the presentations this afternoon. I think the sense about the encouragement and interest in more research, and that the need to bring more of a culture of research in the field of teacher education, and that we've got a lot to say within that context, and there's a need to build on that more. I think there's a tendency just to assume certain things without a lot of evidence to support what we are saying. Secondly, I think there's also a recognition and lots of contributions about the challenges that that teachers and teacher educators face in this area, and the importance of actually building expertise, the encouraging reflexivity and so on, and ways in which people can develop their knowledge and experience, and that there's a danger, I think, of us putting too many assumptions upon teachers and teacher educators, and how do we build that sense of confidence and support. And thirdly, there's a lot of comments about pedagogical approaches, about different ways, and that's particularly reflected in the presentation from Bamberg, and look at different ways these things are interpreted, and then the need for more research in that area. And I think the sense in which our field, as we know, is a growing field, but also it comes into much into conflict, but challenges about with the dominant ideologies that exist within both education and teacher education around the world. And how do we then respond to those things? And there was quite a few people have talked about interdisciplinarity, about the sense about providing support to people across institutions and so on. So I just like to say thank you for those contributions. And I'd like to pass on to my colleague Massimiliano Tarozzi, who's coordinator of the Angel Network, to say a few closing remarks. Massimiliano.
Thank you, Doug. Finally, I'd like to conclude by reminding everyone next seminar, cooperation between NGOs and schools, condition for success. Don't forget, February the 9th at 2 p.m. UK time, 3 p.m. European Central Time. So see you on the 9th for the next seminar in this Angel series. Goodbye, everyone, and thank you for being here.